It started the way all betrayals do. Quietly. No fanfare, no grand explosion. Just a flicker of something wrong. A cold draft through the window of a familiar room. Monday morning, 8:45, and I was the first one in the office again. I always was. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stirred the powdered creamer into my coffee, listening to the silence of a building that didn't yet know what kind of day it would be. The carpet still held the vacuum lines from the night crew. My desk, third row, second cubicle from the end, was already cluttered with notes from the weekend, reminders I'd scribbled down in the middle of a family barbecue, in the bathroom mirror steam, on a napkin at the diner. That was the job. Marketing analyst for a mid-sized logistics firm trying not to drown in a sea of younger, faster, more aggressive competitors. I didn't mind the pressure. Hell, I thrived in it. 21 years in the same office, watching the logo change, watching bosses rise and fall. You learn to be the steady hand when everyone else is flailing. That's what I was doing last quarter, being the steady hand. The company had been bleeding accounts for 6 months, and while everyone else was in damage control mode, I was tracking the problem. I found the leak. Our biggest competitor had poached 2 of our account managers, and they were siphoning off client lists, slowly, methodically, so it wouldn't raise flags. But I noticed. I always notice. I brought it straight to Walter, my boss for the last 3 years. Walter was a numbers guy, decent with spreadsheets, less so with people. He had the air of a man who got promoted for not making waves. When I handed him my report, thick with data, timelines, highlighted email threads that skirted NDAs, he looked at me like I'd handed him a live grenade. "Let me handle it, Jeff," he said. I nodded. Trusted him. That was my mistake. What I didn't know at the time was that Walter was already on thin ice with the board. 2 quarters of red ink and they were sharpening their knives. My report was his ticket back to solid ground. But if it came from me, not him, he'd just be the guy who let it get that bad in the first place. So he did what corporate climbers do. He took my work, sanitized the signature, and pitched it as his own at the executive meeting I wasn't invited to. I only found out because Carla from finance let it slip during happy hour. "Nice save, Jeff." Or should I say, "Nice save, Walter?" She laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. That night I sat in my car for an hour, watching the sun go down over the parking lot, the empty vending machine flickering behind the tinted glass of the break room. Something twisted in my chest, slow and sour. I'd given more to this place than to my marriage, than to my kids some days. And now my name had been stripped from the one thing that might have mattered. I told myself it was just ego. But in my gut, I knew better. Something was coming. I could feel it. Tuesday morning, the vultures circled. I mean that literally. Upper management from corporate headquarters in Chicago had flown in overnight, and their sudden presence sent a ripple through the office like a storm front moving in. Suits we hadn't seen in years strolled through our cubicles, all smiles and handshakes, while their eyes scanned every desk like they were measuring the drapes. People straightened up, whispered, printed resumes in the bathroom. That kind of tension gets in your bones if you've been around long enough. And I had. So I knew. Layoffs were coming. Or worse, restructuring. Walter played the role of dutiful manager well that morning, walking beside the regional VP like he was part of the elite circle. He wasn't, but he wanted to be. And nothing says team player like a timely scapegoat. I saw him glance at me once from the glass conference room while they talked. Just once. He looked away quick, like a man looking at a photograph of someone he used to know. And right then I knew what he was planning. I had become a liability, the guy who knew too much, the guy who could pull back the curtain if he felt slighted enough. Walter had carved out a lifeboat, and I was about to be tossed overboard to make space. Around 10 a.m., he called me in for a touch base. That was Walter's favorite term. Non-committal, safe. His office was warm, almost too warm, and smelled like stale air freshener and cold coffee. "Jeff," he said, gesturing for me to sit. I didn't. I just stood there, waiting. He adjusted his tie. "So, some changes coming down from upstairs. Nothing official yet, but we're going to be doing some departmental optimization." I raised an eyebrow. "Cutbacks?" I said. He nodded, carefully, like the word tasted sour. "Potentially. But this is also a great chance to, align roles with core strengths." I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it came out anyway. Dry and humorless. "You mean a great chance for you to make yourself look clean?" His jaw tensed. I saw the flicker of defensiveness, then the pivot to condescension. "Jeff, I know you're passionate, but let's be real. You've been here a long time, maybe too long. The company's evolving. We need agile thinkers, people who can pivot quickly, adopt new tech." He leaned back like he was already delivering my eulogy. "You've done great work. No one's denying that. But this might be a good time to start thinking about your next chapter." There it was, the polite execution, dressed up in HR speak and false empathy. I stared at him, my mouth dry. 21 years of service, erased with a paragraph he probably rehearsed in the mirror. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "I'll start thinking." But I already knew I wasn't going quietly. You don't burn a man's house down and expect him to hand you the matches. Walter thought he was cleaning house. But he'd forgotten I built the damn foundation, and I still had the blueprints. I didn't sleep much that night, just lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it click with every slow rotation. My wife, Marissa, stirred beside me a few times but didn't say anything. We'd been married long enough for her to know when I needed space. Or maybe she just didn't want to ask. I'd always been the one who had it handled. Steady job, reliable paycheck, health insurance. I kept us safe. Boring maybe, but safe. And now that safety was circling the drain because some empty suit saw me as a threat to his promotion. By Wednesday morning, I had a plan. Not revenge, not yet. Just insurance. I came in early again. Earlier than usual, even. The office was still dark, the only sound the hum of the servers in IT and the occasional clatter from the janitor's cart down the hall. I logged into my workstation and started pulling everything. Emails, spreadsheets, calendar invites, file change logs. Every trace of the account theft I'd uncovered, every internal note I'd sent Walter, every version of the report he'd scrubbed clean before walking it into the boardroom. I cataloged it all, backed it up to an encrypted USB, and locked that inside my glove compartment. Belt, suspenders, and parachute. Then I started documenting Walter's trail. He was careless. Most people who've never been caught are. I found metadata linking him to my original report, time-stamped edits in our internal system that clearly showed when he'd copied and pasted my analysis into his executive pitch. Hell, I even found a Teams chat where he asked me to polish up those figures before I take them upstairs? A message I'd forgotten, but that now read like a smoking gun. He hadn't just stolen credit. He'd orchestrated a fraud, claimed to have uncovered the account breaches himself, and the company had rewarded him with a leadership summit invite and a glowing performance review. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sitting there in the cubicle I'd occupied for more than 2 decades, knee-deep in evidence of my own erasure. Most guys my age were gearing up for retirement parties, gold watches, a round of beers with old colleagues. I was laying down a paper trail like a man prepping for war. The bitterness hadn't fully set in yet, just the numb, quiet clarity of knowing exactly what someone thinks you're worth. Walter thought I was a worn-out cog, a relic, an acceptable sacrifice to keep his name out of the fire. He forgot that cogs keep the machine running. You remove one, things grind loud and ugly. Around lunchtime, I saw the email come through. Company-wide all hands, Friday at 3 p.m., mandatory attendance. Subject line bland as beige paint. But I knew what it meant. The guillotine was being wheeled onto the stage. Walter would play the humble hero, say some words about tough times and forward momentum, and behind the scenes, a list of names would disappear from the directory. I'd bet anything mine was at the top. But what Walter didn't know, and what I wasn't about to warn him about, was that I wasn't on the list alone. I had started adding names to a file titled Shared Accountability. His name was first. Thursday came and went like a long breath held underwater. No confrontations, no whispered warnings, just the usual charade of productivity. People tapping keyboards a little louder than usual, trying to look busy, as if effort could shield them from what was coming. I kept my head down, just another middle-aged man doing his job, biding his time. But inside, I was sharpening knives, not out of vengeance, but out of self-respect. I wasn't going to beg for a seat in a house I helped build. If they were kicking me out, I'd at least make sure the foundation cracked under the weight of that lie. Walter barely looked at me that day. He passed my cubicle 3 times, twice without making eye contact, once with a tight, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was already writing me out of the story, like I was a ghost haunting a house he planned to redecorate. I could see it in his posture, the false confidence in his stride, like he'd convinced himself he'd earned this win, like he believed he'd earned the credit. Maybe that's the worst part, when someone doesn't just betray you but actually believes they're the better man. By late afternoon, I had everything ready. The folder of documents, the annotated timeline, screenshots, copies of internal memos, even old performance reviews that proved the timeline of events. I'd written a clear, simple cover letter and printed it on company letterhead. A little touch of irony. I addressed the envelope to HR, CC'd to the legal department, and slid it into the outgoing mail bin just before I left. I could have sent it anonymously. I could have fired it off from a burner account or dropped it in an unmarked envelope. But no, I wanted my name on it. Let them know exactly who was holding the match. That night, I took my wife out for dinner. Nothing fancy, just burgers and beers at a place we used to go when we were still dating. I didn't tell her everything, not yet. Just enough to let her know things might change soon. She looked at me the way only someone who's seen you at your worst can look. Equal parts worry and trust. "You'll land on your feet," she said quietly, over a basket of fries. I nodded, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was the weight of 21 years pressing down on me like a closing door. When we got home, the kids were already asleep, and I stood in the doorway of my son's room for a long time. He's 11. Too young to understand what it means when a man loses his footing in the world, but old enough to notice when something's wrong. I didn't want him to see me fall, not like this. That's the thing about slow-burn betrayal. It doesn't explode. It smolders, eats through the beams quietly until one day the ceiling caves in. But I wasn't planning on being buried under it, not anymore. Walter thought he was ending a story. He didn't know I was just starting a new chapter. They called it an all hands. But by 3 p.m. on Friday, everyone already knew what it really was. A funeral with finger foods. The conference room was packed, shoulder to shoulder with anxious faces, awkward small talk, and fake optimism. I stood near the back, just inside the doorway, where I could see everything. The regional VP, Nancy Martin, stood at the head of the table, all polished smiles and tight phrasing, reading from a corporate script she probably didn't write. As part of our restructuring initiative, We're positioning ourselves to stay competitive in an evolving market landscape. Her voice was calm, practiced, distant. People nodded like they understood, like the words weren't soaked in blood. Walter stood to her right, stiff in a navy blazer I'd never seen him wear before, probably bought for this exact moment. He wasn't smiling. He was trying to look serious, professional, like a man burdened with difficult but necessary decisions. But I saw the way he avoided eye contact with me, the way his hand shook slightly when he adjusted the mic. That was fear, barely hidden behind executive posture. He knew. My envelope had made its way into the system. I hadn't heard anything official, but something in his eyes gave it away. He was waiting for a shoe to drop. He just didn't know how many were coming. They started calling names, one by one. Thank you for your service. We'll support you in the transition. Please meet with HR in conference room B. It was quiet, brutal, clean. A line of employees escorted out like cattle at a loading dock. No applause, no speeches, just goodbyes that felt more like erasures. Then Nancy folded her hands and said the worst phrase I've ever heard in a workplace. If you didn't hear your name, you're safe for now. For now, like a storm cloud always hanging overhead, ready to burst. The survivors didn't cheer. They just sighed and glanced sideways, already wondering if they were next. I waited. No one called my name. Not then. That would have been too obvious. Walter wouldn't risk the optics of firing me in front of everyone, especially not now that the letter was out there. He needed distance. He needed deniability. That's why, after the room cleared, he asked me to step into his office for a quick word. The tone was casual, but I heard the strain, like a man trying not to flinch during surgery. I followed him inside. He shut the door gently, hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. "Jeff," he said, "we need to talk about your future here." I leaned against the wall. "Do we?" He paused. "There's been concern from upstairs about your attitude lately, about some documents being circulated that raise questions." He cleared his throat. "We're not trying to make this adversarial, but you are," I cut in. "You want me to walk, quietly, before legal takes an interest, before HR realizes what I've given them." His face changed then, just a flicker, a crack in the mask. He looked suddenly older, smaller. "Let's not turn this into something bigger than it needs to be." "Oh," I said, stepping closer. "It already is. The thing about standing up for yourself after a lifetime of swallowing your pride is that it doesn't feel like a victory. Not right away. It feels like freefall, like stepping out onto a ledge and hoping the ground catches you." Walter stood there, across from me, fiddling with a pen that wasn't his. That's how I knew he was unraveling. The man couldn't even keep a grip on his own damn office supplies. "I'll make you an offer," he said. 3 months severance, quiet departure. We call it a mutual separation." I stared at him. "You want me to disappear, right? Just vanish into some NDA graveyard while you hold on to a job you didn't earn?" His lips tightened, but he didn't deny it. "It's business, Jeff. You know that. You're a smart guy, but you're not adaptable. You're from a different time." He meant obsolete, fossilized, replaceable. It was amazing how many ways a corporate man could say, "You're done," without ever saying the words. I took a deep breath, held it, let it out slow. And then I gave him the gift he never expected. I said yes. "I'll take the offer," I told him. "But not because I'm scared, not because I'm beaten. I'm taking it because I want the time, the space, and because while you're still in here playing chess with other people's careers, I'll be out there. Free." He didn't know what to do with that. Men like Walter need a fight. They need you to yell, to punch the wall, to give them a reason to say, "See, unstable, angry, not a team player." I gave him nothing, just silence and a slow, measured nod. I left my badge on his desk and walked out without looking back. Packed my things into a box, just the essentials, really. A few framed photos, my worn-out coffee mug, the potted plant Carla gave me 5 birthdays ago. A few people hovered, not sure if they should say something. I gave them the same nod. It was enough. 2 weeks later, the company was under internal investigation. HR flagged my packet. Legal opened an inquiry. Walter's performance claims didn't line up with system logs. The emails couldn't be ignored. I didn't even need to make a big show of it. Once the dominoes started falling, all I had to do was watch. Quietly. Patiently. By March, Walter was gone. Resigned for personal reasons, the press release said. I almost laughed. Carla texted me the announcement with a single word. Boom. I started consulting not long after that. Small logistics firms that actually wanted experience. I worked fewer hours, got to see my son's baseball games, took my wife to lunch on Tuesdays just because I wasn't rich, but I was free and clean. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that office, the hum of the lights, the cheap coffee, the years I gave. But then I remember the look on Walter's face when he realized I wasn't broken. I was just done playing. And that's when I smile. Because he fired me while I was saving his job, and I walked away better.